Hello, I'm recording for English interpretive listening task. So the task is to search for one topic of the topics that was given. So I choose the first topic. It's about choosing the right podcast. After I choose the topic, I need to go to AI and ask AI for the material. So I go to AI and ask the AI for the material. And then after I get the material from AI, I ask Google Translate to read it. And then I listen to the reading. And after that, now I'm going to re-explain it. So the podcast is good to improve our English skills from listening, especially in listening skills. So podcast is very interesting because it may have different subject, like if you are interested in animal, you can listen to animal podcasts, or if you are interested in cooking, you can listen to cooking podcasts, or if you like sports, you can listen to sport podcasts, and so on. So that's why podcast is an interest. Listening to podcasts is very interesting and very useful to improve our English skills, especially in listening. So then, how the steps to choose the right podcast? So the first step is to know your level. So if you are a beginner and then you try to listen to advanced English podcasts, it will be you can't understand it, and you will get sleepy. So you have to know your English level. If you are, so there is like the level of English, there is a beginner. So there is a beginner, and then the next level is intermediate, and then the highest level is the advanced level. So when you are a beginner, you need to look for a podcast that use very easy vocabulary so you can understand what they are saying. And then if you are an intermediate, So you can look for more difficult podcasts. And then if you are an advanced, you can listen to even more difficult podcasts. So the first thing you need to do is to know your level. Are you a beginner, or are you an intermediate, or are you an advanced? And then when you already know your level, what you need to do is to choose your interest. To choose your interest. So you can listen to any podcast. So there are a lot of podcasts out there. There is from cooking. You can choose cooking if you like cooking, or you can choose what films and films review, maybe. If you like some, if you like to watch some film, and then you like to listen to film review before you watch them, so you can choose film. So you can choose film review podcast, or you can choose maybe sport, right? Sport podcast. It can be any sport, or it can be more. And then after choosing your interest, you need to set goals. You need to set goals. So how do we set goals? So setting our goals, for example, you have to listen to one episode of podcast in a week, or if you want to be more getting more practice, you can add more time. So if you are just want to have it one episode in a week, maybe, right? This is just, if you are really busy, you can just listen to one episode in a week. If you want to be more, having more practice, you can add, like, listen to two to three podcasts in a week. Or if you want to be more the practice, you want to improve your English fast, you can listen to one podcast, one episode every day. Yes, that will be very great, right? One episode every day. After setting goals, you also need to have discussion, right? You need to have discussion. You need to have engagement. Discussion, engagement. Usually in the podcast, after or before the ending of the podcast, usually the speaker will ask the audience what they were thinking of the opinion, what they are what their opinion. So you can comment, you can send message to them, you can discuss of the topic to other listener, with other listener, and yeah, having a discussion. And then if you are getting bored of listening, for example, you getting bored listening to cooking podcasts, you can also listen to two topics at one time. Maybe in Monday you listen to cooking podcast, and then Tuesday you listen to film review podcast, and then Wednesday you listen to sport podcast, and so on. So you are not getting bored of listen to only one topic of podcast only. And then of course there are a lot to choose from podcasts. So we need to get recommendation. Of course, there are like 100 cooking podcasts out there. So we need to search for the best cooking podcast. So we can search for the best cooking podcast in podcast podcast libraries. So there are some application that special for listening podcasts. The application is maybe you can have from Apple Podcasts. Also there is Spotify, right? Or any other service. So after knowing all these steps, now you can listen to the podcast to improve your English. Alright, thank you.